Sometimes, the deepest heartbreak don't come from strangers or lovers or even loss. Sometimes it comes in the shape of someone you raised with your own hands. Someone who once fell asleep on your chest, warm as a peach. There's a silence that follows certain words, a kind of hush that don't just hang in the air, but settles inside you. I've lived long enough to know, when someone you love says you're dead to them, part of you starts to believe it. But this ain't a story about bitterness. It's about the slow reckoning of a mother's heart. The ache of being human. The quiet turns we take when we think nobody's watching. If you enjoy stories like these, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd subscribe, give it a like, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It always means something when folks like you take the time to listen. Now, let me take you back to the morning it all began. The rain was soft that day. Not the kind that made you close the windows, but the kind that made you leave them open just to smell it. I remember the tea kettle never whistled. I'd filled it, lit the flame, but never set it right. Just like so many things in those weeks, half started, never finished. I was standing in the kitchen, holding a letter I hadn't yet opened, when the phone rang. It was a number I knew by heart, though I'd deleted the contact months ago. When I answered, her voice cracked like old glass. "You still have that necklace?" I said nothing. Then she added, "Because I want it back. It was Grandma's, not yours." My mouth went dry, but my voice was steady as cold stone. "That necklace belongs to memory," I said. "And I ain't in the habit of giving ghosts what they demand." She hung up, and I stood there, tea unboiled, letter unopened, heart unmended, wondering how a daughter I once loved more than breath could become a stranger wearing her face. It started with the wind, oddly enough. One of those late September gusts that sweeps through the Carolinas like it's cleaning out summer's last breath. I was sitting on the back porch with Muffin curled beside me, her gray tail twitching in the breeze. That wind carried the scent of dried pine needles and old memories, and with it, a faint clatter I couldn't place. When I looked up, I saw it. The wrought iron wind chime hanging from the dogwood branch had finally broken free. It lay in the grass like a snapped necklace, the tiny metal leaves tangled in each other. Funny, isn't it, how the smallest things can undo you? I gathered it up, sat back down, and traced each little leaf with my thumb. That chime was a gift from my daughter, Lacey, on my 60th birthday. She tied it with a ribbon, handwritten tag and all. "So you'll always hear me when I'm not around." She hadn't spoken to me in nearly 2 years. Well, that's not quite true. She'd spoken. Just not in a way a mother ought to hear from her child. The last real conversation we had ended with words that still echo like thunder down a well. "You're dead to me." It was a sentence spoken without flinch, without tremble. Just a flat line. And after that silence, I'd kept the chime anyway. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of hope. But that morning, as I held the broken pieces in my lap, I realized something I hadn't dared admit aloud. I didn't want to fix it. Some part of me was tired of holding on to broken things. So I set the chime down and walked back inside. In the study drawer sat a manila envelope. I'd been staring at it for weeks. Inside were the latest papers from the lawyer, clean, simple, final. Just a signature and a date. It wasn't rage that made me pick up the pen. It was grief. And a mother's reluctant clarity. I signed my name, folded the envelope shut, and felt a quiet sort of ending take hold in my chest. Then the phone rang. Lacey was my firstborn. Came into the world like a firecracker on a rainy 4th of July. Eyes wide, lungs full, hair dark as molasses. I remember looking at her tiny hands and thinking, well, now I've got something I'd die for. She was always intense. Even as a child. Loved hard, fought harder. If she scraped her knee, you'd think the world was ending. If she loved a doll, she'd dress it in hand-sewn clothes and tuck it in with lullabies. That girl had a hurricane's heart trapped in a little body. Her daddy, Samuel, used to call her little judge. Said she had a look that could sentence a man just by squinting. We lived in a modest house just outside Charleston, brick-faced and sunbaked, surrounded by camellia bushes I still prune to this day. I taught high school English then. Samuel ran his own carpentry business. We weren't rich, but we had laughter and routines and summer trips to Myrtle Beach. We had Sunday pancakes. We had peace. Lacey was 11 when her brother, Caleb, was born. I remember her marching into the hospital room, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "That's him," she said. I nodded. "He looks like a raisin." But the moment I placed Caleb in her arms, she melted. That's the thing about Lacey. She can turn on a dime, but when she loves you, it's all in. They were close for years. She helped him with homework, scolded him when he swiped her snacks, taught him how to talk to girls when he hit 13 and his voice dropped like a stone. I used to call them my sun and moon. One always churnine, the other always pullin' from the shadows. But things started shiftin' when Lacey hit college. She got into Duke on scholarship, smart as a whip, determined to be her own woman. Samuel and I were proud as peaches, but I'll admit, we weren't prepared for how far she'd drift. Phone calls turned short. Visits turned rare. When she came home, she'd bring sharp opinions and a chip on her shoulder, like our way of life embarrassed her now. One Thanksgiving she said, "Y'all still use cable? That's so dated." Samuel chuckled. "Well, excuse us, Miss Progress." But I saw the way Lacey rolled her eyes, like she couldn't believe she'd ever come from our porch swing and sweet tea world. Then came the man she married. His name was Jason Marks, slick as a river rock, smile like a closed door. The first time he came to dinner, he brought a bottle of wine none of us could pronounce and spent most of the evening scrawling his phone under the table. Samuel didn't care for him. Neither did Caleb. But I tried. Lord knows I tried. I remember one night after they left, I was washing dishes and Samuel came up behind me, hands in his pockets like he did when something was weighing on him. "He don't see her," he said. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "He sees a version of her. Polished. Strategic. Pretty enough to show off at conferences. But not her. Not our girl who made fairy houses in the backyard and cried over stray kittens." And my dear, he was right. Jason had a way of making Lacey smaller, more agreeable. She started second-guessing herself around him, holding her tongue. But she said she was happy, and what mother wants to be the stone in her daughter's shoe? They got married in Asheville. Mountain wedding, tight guest list, fancy appetizers with names like pear compote crostini. I wore a blue lace dress and kept my smile plastered like wallpaper. Caleb made a toast about the people we love who shape us. And I watched Lacey wipe a tear, though I couldn't tell if it was joy or grief. Years passed. They moved to Atlanta. Lacey climbed the ranks at her firm, became a partner before 35. She and Jason bought a sleek condo, traveled to Dubai, Greece, Morocco. Their Christmas cards looked like catalog pages. Them on a camel, them in a snow globe town in Switzerland, always side by side but never quite touching. She called less and less. And when she did, it was updates, not conversations. Promotions. Flights. Renovations. No feeling behind it. Just the facts. Then, when Samuel died, she didn't come. Said the client meeting couldn't be moved. Said, Daddy would understand. But I knew better. She didn't come to the hospital. Didn't hold his hand when it went cold. Didn't sit with Caleb and me as we picked out the mahogany casket Samuel would have hated. I sent her the funeral program anyway. No response. Not even a flower. And that was when something in me cracked. I kept waiting for the apology. For the late night call, the tears, the regret. But all I got was a voicemail a month later. "Hey, just checking in. Hope you're okay. Let me know when you want to talk business stuff." Business. Like her father's death was just another loose end to tie up. I never called her back. The next time we saw each other was a year later, in that lawyer's office. And that, my dear, is where the real story begins. It was a cloudless Monday when I walked into that lawyer's office. The kind of cold, bright day that makes everything look cleaner than it feels. I wore my navy coat with the pearl buttons, hair pinned back, and carried a folder tucked under my arm like a shield. Caleb had offered to come with me, bless him, but I told him no. This is something I need to do alone. Mr. Halperin, the lawyer, was a patient, gray-haired gentleman who smelled faintly of spearmint and dust. He greeted me like always, kind, courteous, but I could feel the tension in the air as soon as I sat down. "Ellie," he said gently, "just so you know, Lacey and Jason arrived 10 minutes ago. They're waiting in conference room B." I felt my chest tighten like a drawstring. I hadn't seen my daughter in almost 18 months. And I hadn't laid eyes on that man since the wedding. When I walked in, they stood. Lacey out of habit, Jason for show. She looked older somehow, sharper around the eyes, paler in the cheeks. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, lips pressed into a line. Jason wore a charcoal suit and that same smug, unreadable smile. "Mother," she said. "Not mama. Not mom. Just mother," like I was some client she'd tolerated too long. I nodded. "Lacey." Jason leaned forward. "Ellie. Good to see you. Hope the drive wasn't too rough." I ignored him. Mr. Halperin got straight to the point. The estate, the trust, the adjustments I was preparing to finalize. Jason kept asking clarifying questions, all with that polished politeness that made my skin crawl. Lacey just stared down at her lap, fiddling with her watch. Then it came time for signatures. And that's when Lacey finally spoke. "You're cutting me out." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I saw her as she once was. 6 years old, standing in the kitchen with jelly on her chin, begging me not to cut the crusts off her sandwich because only babies eat it like that. And now here she was, 38, in heels sharp enough to kill, accusing me of betrayal like I hadn't been betraying myself for years just to keep the door open. I answered quiet. "I'm adjusting things to reflect how things stand now." She blinked. "So yes, you're cutting me out." Jason shifted in his seat. "Ellie, if this is about missing the funeral." I cut him off with a look. "This is about patterns, not moments." Lacey's voice trembled then, but not with sadness, with rage. "So that's it? Decades of sacrifice, all erased because I didn't perform my grief to your liking." My hands stayed folded in my lap. "It ain't about performance. It's about presence. And absence. And the silence in between." She stood. "You're unbelievable. You know that." Jason followed suit, jaw tight. "You sure this is the move you want to make, Ellie? These documents are hard to walk back." I stood too. "Then it's a good thing I brought a pen I trust." Lacey turned, stormed toward the door, then paused. She didn't look at me when she said it. Didn't even raise her voice. "You're dead to me." And just like that, the door closed. No van. No Islam. Just that soft, final click that told me the child I raised was no longer in the room. Mr. Halperin cleared his throat, but I waved him off. I picked up the pen and signed each page with a hand that didn't tremble. When I stepped out into the cold afternoon light, I realized my chest felt hollow. Not relieved. Not triumphant. Just empty in the way an old house feels after the last box is packed. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was echoing. 2 weeks passed in a strange sort of haze. I moved through the house like a ghost, Tidian drawers that didn't need Tidian, polish and silver I hadn't used since Samuel's last birthday. Muffin followed me from room to room, her paws soft as questions, her eyes full of a knowing she couldn't name. The air inside the house felt different now, heavier somehow. Like even the walls were waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Thursday. No return address, just my name in that unmistakable print I hadn't seen in years, blocky, careful, like every letter was being watched. Inside was one sentence, scribbled on the back of a receipt from a wine shop. "You always loved Caleb more."
No signature. No puntuación.
Just that. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter crumpled in my palm, heart beating like a war drum. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the cowardice of it. The way it came slipped into my mailbox like a venomous thing, quiet and unclaimed. And Lord help me, I wanted to deny it. To shout, "No, that's not true." But somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "Is it?" Caleb had always been the easier one. Gentle, even-tempered, grateful. He'd call just to say he loved me. Bring groceries when I didn't ask. Ask questions and actually listen to the answers. Where's Lacey? Lacey always came with fire. I loved her no less. But it looked different. And maybe to her that difference felt like less. That night I called Caleb. Told him about the letter. He got quiet for a long moment, then said, "She sent me something too." "What?" "A photo. Of Dad. One of those old Polaroids. Him on the porch swing with you." Why would she? She wrote on the back. Ask her about August 1996. The room went cold, because I knew exactly what she meant. August 1996. It was the summer everything shifted beneath the surface, quiet and dangerous, like a fault line nobody saw coming. Samuel had been working long hours then, refinishing the old courthouse downtown. Caleb was still a toddler, all curls and jelly fingers. And Lacey, she was 9. Something fragile and fierce was startin' to bloom in her. The kind of deep feelin' only certain girls carry. The kind the world don't always know what to do with. That month she caught me cryin'. I'd been standin' in the laundry room, buryin' my face in a dish towel, tryin' to muffle the sobs that had been buildin' for weeks. I don't remember what started it that day. Maybe the loneliness, maybe the weight of bein' the glue nobody noticed until it cracked. Lacey stood in the doorway, barefoot and silent. "Mama," she whispered. I turned too slow. She saw. She knew. I wiped my face fast, tried to smile. "Just tired, baby." But she didn't move. "You fight with Daddy?" "No," I said. "Too fast. Too clipped." She nodded, slow and solemn, then turned and walked away. I didn't follow. And that, I think, was the start of her deciding I wasn't safe to bring things to. That my quiet sadness meant she had to be the strong one. And strength in her mind became armor. Sharp edges. Distance. I never talked to Samuel about that day. But now, almost 30 years later, I could still see her small back disappearing down the hall. The weight of what I didn't say still hung in the air like a storm that never broke. "Do you think she hates me?" I asked Caleb that night. He sighed. "I think she doesn't know how to love you without proof." That hurt more than any insult. Because how do you prove love? What does it look like when the flowers are wilted and the cake's long since eaten? A week later, I got another letter. This one had a copy of the will, circled in red. Interesting that Caleb gets the house. And then, funny how memory works, isn't it? That's when I realized this wasn't grief. It was a war. And my daughter had just declared it. I hadn't stepped into the attic in over a year. Not since Samuel passed. Not since I packed away the last of his flannel shirts and folded the letter he wrote me on our 10th anniversary. The one that said, "If the kids ever ask, tell 'em I loved you before you even looked my way." But that Saturday, something in me stirred. The kind of ache that don't just sit in your chest, it pulls you. The attic smelled of cedar and thyme. Dust danced in the slats of light spillin' through the gable window. I pulled down boxes like I was searchin' for something I didn't even know was missing. And then I found it. A manila envelope, tucked between old tax returns and yellowed school drawings. Lacey's name, written in Samuel's handwriting. I sat cross-legged on the floor, knees poppin', breath shallow. Opened it. Inside was a letter. And a photograph. The photo showed Samuel and a little girl on his lap. Lacey, no more than 6, her cheeks sun-pinked, missin' a front tooth. She was Logan. He was staring at her like she was the whole damn universe. The letter was dated August 28, 1996. Lace, it began. "One day, when you're old enough to read this, your mama and I hope you'll understand. I've been working too much. Missin' too many suppers. You've been so brave, taking care of Caleb when your mama's worn thin. But it ain't your job to carry us. You're the child. We're the grown-ups. And even if we fall short, which we do, baby girl, we do, you are loved. Don't let the quiet fool you. Your mama's heart is louder than you know." I pressed that letter to my chest and wept like I hadn't since the funeral. Because somehow Samuel, with his calloused hands and few words, had seen what I hadn't. That Lacey had carried burdens too big for her shoulders, and I'd let her. Not out of cruelty. Out of exhaustion. Out of blind hope that she'd be okay. Because she seemed okay. But children don't need to be strong. They need to be held. And I hadn't known how to hold her. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, lights off, that letter from Samuel folded in my lap like a verdict. Outside, the crickets sang their high, unbothered chorus, as if nothing had changed. But inside me, the dam had broken. At 3:17 a.m., I picked up the phone and called Lacey. Not to fight. Not to accuse. Just to say it. It rang 4 times before her voice, sharp and sleepy, answered. "What do you want?" I found Daddy's letter to you, I said softly. From 1996. Silence. Lacey, I whispered, he saw you. Even when I didn't. She exhaled, a quiet, jagged sound like wine through broken glass. I don't want to do this now, she said, voice trembling. But we have to, I said. I let you carry too much. I leaned on your strength because I was sinking. And I never told you I knew. You didn't want to know, she snapped. You just assumed I'd be fine. That I'd always be fine. I did, I admitted. And I was wrong. A beat. Then her voice cracked, small and raw. I hated you for that. I know. I hate you still sometimes. I know, I said again. And I still love you. Always will. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. Then, barely audible. Why did you leave me out of the will? Because I thought you were gone, I said. And I was grieving you like a death. Another pause. Then, I sent those letters to hurt you. I know. I wanted you to feel what I felt. Invisible. Less than. Unchosen. My voice broke. You were never unchosen. You gave Caleb the house. Because he still visits it. So I have to show up to earn my place? No. Y whisperat. You have to want to be part of this family again. More silence. Then, for the first time in years, her voice softened. What now? And that, my dear, was the truest question of all. The next morning, I woke to a soft knock on the door. Not the kind you expect from a postman or a neighbor. This one was slow, unsure. Like the hand behind it wasn't used to coming home. I opened the door. Lacey stood there. No makeup. No earrings. Just jeans, a sweatshirt, and that face I hadn't seen unguarded in a decade. Hi, she said, eyes red-rimmed. Hi, I said back. We stood there a long moment, moths fluttering in the porch light between us. Then I stepped aside. She walked in like she was afraid the floor might disappear beneath her feet. I made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug like a child holding a secret. We didn't speak at first. Just breathed the same air for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Then she said, I reread the letter. That's. I nodded. I think I hated him too. A little. For seeing me and still leaving so much unsaid. I looked at her, really looked. He left that letter behind for a reason. He knew it would find you when you were ready. She let out a shaky breath. What if I'm still not ready? Then we start small, I said. One truth at a time. She looked down into her cup. I don't want the house. Not like this. I just wanted to matter. You do, I said. You always did. She laughed, short and bitter. You've said that more in the last day than you did in 20 years. I didn't defend myself. There was nothing left to defend. I made mistakes, I said instead. I let your strength excuse my silence. I thought you didn't need softness because you wore armor so well. I learned that from you, she said, eyes glassy. You never asked for help either. We sat with that for a while, the weight of inheritance neither of us wanted. After the coffee cooled, we went out back to the garden. The camellias were still bloomless, but their leaves had held steady through the last frost. I knelt to clear some dead mulch. Lacey watched me a minute before kneeling beside me. Her hands tentative, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch this place anymore. She reached for the clippers then paused. Do you remember, she said slowly, when I won that spelling bee in 3rd grade? I smiled faintly. The word was carousel. You wore that yellow dress with the sash that kept coming undone. You baked a chocolate cake. With the sprinkles Caleb poured on when he thought you weren't looking. He dumped the whole bottle. We both laughed. A small startled sound like opening a music box you thought was broken. Then her laughter faded. I remember how proud you were. But I also remember thinking, would you still be proud if I lost? I looked at her, my hands still in the dirt. Yes, I said. But I never told you that, did I? She shook her head. We planted silence between us again. After a while she whispered, I've hated so many things about you. Your distance. Your stillness. The way you always seemed so sure. Even when things were falling apart. I nodded. And I've resented you too. For leavin' without leavin'. For pullin' away instead of a skin to be pulled close. We sat there, side by side in the soil, no longer mother and daughter, just two women trying to make peace with who they used to be. I'm not ready to forgive everything, she said finally. I'm not a skin for everything, I replied. Just a chance to keep trying it. She looked at me, truly looked, and for the first time in years, I saw a crack in the armor. Not a weakness. A doorway. That night, she stayed for supper. Caleb came by, surprised to find his sister at the table. We didn't talk about the will, or the funeral, or August 1996. We just passed the biscuits. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own home. The days that followed weren't perfect. There were awkward silences, gentle missteps. Lacey came by again the next Tuesday, dropped off a bag of Meyer lemons from her neighbor's tree, and lingered just long enough to drink half a cup of tea. But there was a tenderness returnin', slow as sap in winter. Still at night, I'd find myself sittin' in Samuel's old recliner, wonderin' if maybe love, real unvarnished love, was just learnin' to stay through the awkward parts. I started writin' again. Not stories. Not journals. Letters. One to Lacey. One to Caleb. One to Samuel. Each one honest. Each one tryin'. I wrote to Lacey about the first time I felt her kick. About the time she came home cryin', because a girl at school called her bossy. About the way she used to read to her dolls in that sing-song voice she'd pretend wasn't mine. I ended the letter like this. You were never hard to love. You were just hard for me to reach. And maybe, sometimes I let fear keep me from tryin' harder. But I never stopped wantin' to be close to you. Even when you shut the door. I didn't give it to her. Not yet. Instead, I put it in the drawer with Samuel's watch and Caleb's first tooth. The sacred little things we keep not because they're valuable, but because they remind us who we were when we still believed we had time. That Sunday, I went to church alone. Pastor Wallace preached on mercy. Not the kind you extend when it's easy, but the kind that makes your knees shake. The kind that says, forgive even if they never say sorry. I sat in the third pew, hands folded tight, throat thick. And I realized, I hadn't just been mournin' Samuel. I'd been mournin' the mother I wanted to be. That evening, I lit a candle on the porch. One of those cinnamon ones Lacey used to hate, said it smelled like a dentist's waiting room. I lit it anyway, let the scent curl around me like a memory too stubborn to fade. I held her letter in my lap, fingers brushing the edges. The envelope was plain. No return address. Just her name, in my handwriting this time. But I still couldn't bring myself to deliver it. Because the truth, my dear, is that even when the door opens a crack, the fear of slamming it shut again can keep you from walking through. That night, I dreamed of her as a little girl, maybe 5 or 6. We were sitting under the pecan tree, her knees scraped, hands sticky with juice. She was reading to me from a picture book with the voice she only used when she felt safe. And I remember thinking in the dream, don't wake up. Just let her stay. But I did wake. Always do. And the ache that followed felt like something ancient. Something stitched into the bones of every woman who ever raised a child, and wondered if love alone was enough to cover all the gaps. The next morning, I took the letter out to the garden. The camellias were showing signs of life, tight buds, green at the edges, like they were deciding whether to trust the world again. I buried the letter beneath the soil, right under the one bush that always bloomed late. Not to hide it. Not to forget it. But because I wanted something to grow from it. Grief had taken root in so many corners of this house. I wanted to see if forgiveness could do the same. And maybe, just maybe, bloom brighter. It was a Tuesday in late March when the knock came again. But this time, it wasn't Lacey. It was Jason. He stood on my porch in a press shirt, sleeves rolled just so, his usual calm like a sheet stretched too tight. There was a stiffness to him, like he hadn't expected me to answer. I didn't invite him in. Just stepped out, let the screen door click behind me. Ellie, he said, shifting his weight. Can we talk? I crossed my arms. That depends. Are you here for her, or for yourself? He looked me in the eye, something he hadn't done in years. I'm here because I owe you honesty, he said. And because I'm startin' to think I might have been the wall between you and Lacey more than I realized. I said nothin', let the silence stretch. I read the letter, he added. The one you wrote her. She left it on the counter. Unopened. That hit me square in the chest. She's scared, he said. Scared she missed her chance. Scared if she lets herself need you again, you'll disappoint her the way she remembers. And what about you? I asked. He paused. I think I underestimated you. Treated you like a relic instead of a person. That's on me. His voice cracked just slightly. She's talking about moving back to Charleston. Just part-time. Says maybe it's time to stop running from ghosts. I swallowed hard. She doesn't owe me that. No, he said. But maybe she owes it to herself. Before he left, he reached into his coat and handed me something small, folded linen, soft and square. I opened it after he'd gone. It was a photograph. Lacey, 8 years old, sitting on my lap at the kitchen table, both of us smiling, like the world was still whole. On the back in faint pencil, still here, just quieter. 2 days later, Lacey came by again. This time she didn't knock. Just let herself in like she used to when she was 15 and needed to borrow the iron. Muffin let out a grumble from the windowsill, then curled back into her usual indifference. I found her in the study. She was standing in front of the bookshelf, her fingers trailing the spines of my old poetry volumes like she was reading Braille for a feeling she'd forgotten. I opened the letter, she said, not tinning around. I waited. You wrote about the jelly sandwich. About how I used to line up my crayons by color. I smiled. You wouldn't use them if they weren't sharpened just so. She turned then, her eyes tired but clear. You remember me, she whispered. The parts one thought were invisible to you, you saw them. I did, I said. I just didn't always know how to hold them. She stepped closer. I want to believe this can be different now. But I don't know if I know how to be a daughter anymore. Not really. I reached out, took her hand, cool and tentative. Then let's not start with that, I said. Let's start with coffee. With cleaning out the garage. With finding your old piano books. Her eyes watered. Coffee, she repeated. We stood there a while, her hand in mine, the dust and the hurt still hanging in the air, but no longer heavier than the hope. Later that afternoon, she pulled out boxes from the hall closet. Inside were photo albums, school projects, and a shoebox full of tiny trinkets. A rock from Myrtle Beach, a bracelet from summer camp, a note I once tucked in her lunchbox that simply read, "You are enough." She held it like it was made of gold. And maybe in that moment it was. That night she stayed for dinner again. Caleb joined us. We laughed. We remembered. We cried a little. And I realized, love don't always look like a Hallmark card. Sometimes it looks like showing up with trembling hands and saying, let's try again. Spring came quiet that year. Not in a rush but in slow offerings, dogwood blossoms shyly unfurling, the hum of bees returning to the porch, the light lost in just a little longer with each passing day. Lacey started coming by once a week. Sometimes she brought groceries, sometimes just herself. We'd sit in the garden with tea, pulling weeds between stories. I noticed she didn't correct me as much, didn't flinch when I brought up Samuel, didn't bristle at silence. She even smiled at Muffin once, though she still refused to pet her. One afternoon she brought a box. I've been cleaning out our storage unit, she said, setting it down on the porch. Thought you might want this. Inside were pieces of our old life, report cards, a faded scarf I used to wear to her school plays, and a scrapbook she'd made in middle school titled My Family Tree, even the weirder branches. I flipped through it slow. There was a drawing of Samuel, a pressed flower labeled for Mama's favorite bush, and a section titled Why My Mom Is the Way She Is with bullet points like, probably drinks too much tea, always smells like clean laundry, stares out windows like she's waiting for someone. I laughed, then cried. Lacey watched me, eyes soft. I forgot that part existed. You saw more than I thought, I whispered. She nodded. I always did. Later, she followed me to the camellia bush where I'd buried the letter. It was bloom season now, pink and white blossoms spilling over like the bush had finally decided to trust the world again. I told her about the letter under the soil. She crouched beside me, brushing a petal with her finger. You buried it? Planted it, I corrected. Hoped something good would grow from the grief. She didn't say anything, but she stayed there a long time. A week later she came with a key. We were sitting on the porch, the garden hummin' with bees, the air just warm enough to smell like honeysuckle and soil. She reached into her pocket, pulled it out and set it on the table between us. I rented a place here, she said. Just a small house down by the old library. Month to month. My hand brushed the key. It was simple. Brass. Worn. I looked at her. You stayin' long? She met my eyes. As long as it takes. I didn't ask what she meant. Didn't need to. She was stayin' for the garden days. The uneven healing. The kind of quiet mending that takes longer than we wish it would, but comes all the same if you let it. That Sunday I updated the will. Not because I was angry. Because I wasn't anymore. I didn't remove Lacey. I didn't give her the house either. I wrote this. To my daughter Lacey, you once told me I was dead to you. But grief isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a harder truth. So this house is not an inheritance. It is a place for rebuilding if you choose it. And if you don't, that will be alright too. I just hope the door stays open this time. I signed it in blue ink. The color she used for her school essays. Later that evening, she came over with a lemon tart and a bottle of tea we both hated. We sat under the porch light, the moths flutterin' like old prayers. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Just for a minute. And in that one quiet gesture, I felt the years between us soften. We would never be perfect. But we were no longer pretendin'. We were choosin' each other, slow, painful, real. It's summer now. The camellias are heavy with bloom and the wind chimes. A new set Caleb gave me last month. Tinkle low from the dogwood limb. They don't sound like the ones Lacey gave me years ago. But sometimes I hear echoes of them in the breeze, and I don't flinch like I used to. Lacey still comes by. Not every day. Not always with ease. But enough. She helped me repaint the study last week. Chose a shade called Early Sky. I think she liked the name more than the color. Said it reminded her of those Carolina mornings that feel like clean slates. Caleb started bringing his little girl around more. She's 7 now. Talks nonstop. The other day she asked, Grandma, did Mommy used to be this loud too? I just smiled and said louder. Sometimes Lacey and I talk late into the evening, about nothing, mostly. Jazz records, garden pests, recipes that don't quite turn out. But every now and then, she'll say something real soft like, I used to think you didn't like who I was becoming. And I'll answer, I didn't know how to keep up. We don't revisit the fight. Or the will. Or that awful day with the lawyer. We don't need to. What matters is this, she's here. And for the first time in a long time, so am I. If this story opened something quiet in your heart, my dear, I'd love to know what lingered. Leave me a note below. Share it with someone who might be walking that same long road. And subscribe if you'd like to sit for another story sometime soon. Some tales find us when we need them most. Sometimes the hardest love is the kind we have to relearn. But even the broken branches can bloom again, if the roots are still willin'. Be gentle with yourself. And with the ones you love. Even if they ain't ready to love you back just yet. Until next time, you take care now.